Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to Example of Play, the home for strategy and tactics gaming. If you haven't already subscribed, go ahead and do it now. This video is going to be a first look at Strategic Command War in the Pacific. This is one of my favorite series of war games, and I'm really excited for this game. The Pacific Theater has been something I've been really interested in the last couple of years, just because it's so different and so complicated. And so I'm excited to see how the Strategic Command series handles it, because for me, this is one of my favorite wargaming series. It hits just the right scope and scale and level of complexity that's kind of comfortable and fun to play without overwhelming you with a million counters and units and so many it has just the right amount of detail, and it also has a lot of flavor because you get all these little events, and sometimes you can pick kind of alternate history things without going too far off the rails. And so for me, it's a really fun series, and so I'm excited to see how they handle focusing a game on just the Pacific. There are several scenarios you can play. So we'll look at the grand campaign that's 75 turns long, starts with Pearl Harbor. But there are other campaigns you can play. This little side Caulk and Gaul scenario, I played it already. It's only 24 turns, so it's kind of fun. But of course, it's a very limited scope, mostly ground and air combat scenario. But there's also a Solomon Islands campaign. That's a little shorter. Marianas campaign. That is 46 turns, so pretty long itself, but a little more focused. You can play this scenario, 1945, the Red Army invades Manchuria, so something a little different, or this Iwo Jima focus scenario, which could be interesting to play that too. But if we are just looking at, for today, the main campaign, we'll go here. You can choose to play as the Japanese, or if you choose to play the Allies, you're playing as several countries. But like with all the other Strategic Command games, if you want to simplify things, you can actually let the AI control some of these other ones. So like if you just wanted to play as the United States, you could just let the AI do everything else, which could be an interesting way to play. And if you're kind of new to the series and you don't want to, you feel a little overwhelmed playing as all these factions at once, you can simplify things and just be the United States. Or if you just wanted to play as the Chinese and see how you fare, hoping the AI helps you out, that could be interesting too. There's some options here, kind of standard stuff for the series. You can play with, where is it? I thought you could change it to NATO counters. Somewhere in here you can, but we'll just play with the standard counters. I've actually recently I was playing the Strategic Command American Civil War game and playing through a campaign of that. So that's a mostly ground-based, very old school versus the Pacific, where we got tons of aircraft and tons of ocean to deal with. So it'll be very different. All right, so Japan gets to go first. We'll start it off and just let it run through the Japanese first turn because it shows kind of the scale of the game and what the combat looks like and everything. And it's actually pretty dramatic just seeing how it all plays out. So here we go. We start with the attack on Pearl Harbor. There is some randomness to the combat, so we'll see how it plays out. Will we lose all of our battleships or maybe hang on to one? And just as you can see here, these battleships are very vulnerable to attacks from carriers. Even sitting in port, they're just getting wiped out, while doing just a little bit of damage back to the carriers, probably just representing some of the aircraft being shot down. We can see Hong Kong over here has a 2 strength unit, probably not going to last long. All right, so aircraft, so like this, bombers, when they attack, they can have escorts, they can have interceptors, all that kind of happens automatically if you have fighters in the area. And you'll see basically everyone takes some damage. Then the bombers actually making their bombing run. But already we see the importance of air units here, inflicting casualties before the ground forces even get there. And then here come some naval bombardment. Hong Kong falls. Japanese naval landing forces arriving. So amphibious combat, obviously going to be a big part of this campaign. Japanese land in the Philippines. Now for me, I think it'd be really interesting to play this as the Japanese and, you know, decide, would you play out the historical opening moves? Would you try something different? There's so many options. It's such a complex area with so many different islands, so many places you could land. You know, where are you going to focus your resources? All right, so Wake Island, Guam fall. Singapore is threatened. We got some naval combat. And of course here, the British limited naval assets in the area are going to get a bit overwhelmed. Submarines showing up. Hong Kong falls. Japan invades Thailand. Got some morale suffering for us, going up for Japan. A bunch of these minor nations are going to surrender. And then I like, so if you haven't played these games, you get like little historical photos, little events that'll trigger. And then you have some, like the River Kwai, some of these historical locations will be marked on the map, even if they're not really of any value. Gameplay-wise, they are there just for flavor. US gears up for war. Some units will be triggered by events, just automatically appear on the map, but most units you're going to build over time. And then, so that's the Japanese opening turn. As we can see, quite a few units destroyed, tons of locations captured, lots of events firing on this first turn, and then morale shifting as you'd expect. So another thing the game is great about is giving you kind of advice, you know, usually historical, what was happening, giving you a little recommendation. If you look in the manual for the game, there's also a strategy guide that'll give you kind of some general advice of what you should do in the different areas if you're not sure. So we get some advice for we got some advice for China. Now we get some advice for Australia, and then some advice for the United States for the naval war. How many ships the Japanese have. So 2 super battleships, and then plenty of other ships coming and on the way that we'll have to deal with, and give you some advice on how you might do that. And then usually you get some special events. So like this, Doolittle's bombers, you can trigger. You can't really do that with the normal game mechanics, but they built in kind of a special way you can sort of trigger that to happen. And then some advice for the British. And then, so we get our first units that we can deploy here at the beginning. We got Destroyer, the Enterprise, and the 1st Marine Division. But they are all the way over here on the west coast, far from the front. And then the Australians get a unit too. So first, I was going to just zoom out so we kind of appreciate the scale here of the map. So this is showing the whole map. You don't normally play from this, but you can kind of like use it to get an idea of where everything is. So we see over here, the United States West Coast is all the way over here. We got Hawaii here, and then everything else is kind of over on this side of the map with islands scattered in between. Just to kind of give you an idea, let's see if we pick at the so we have the Saratoga here. It's ready. The Enterprise we can't move till the next turn, but the Saratoga is here. So normal movement, it can go that far. If we do naval cruise, so there's kind of like the equivalent of force marching your unit. So let's see, we can move this far. So we can almost get to Hawaii in one turn, and Hawaii is, so we moved that far in one turn. So that just immediately makes you think of, yeah, every ship and every ground unit, everything coming from the United States is going to have to travel a long way to get there. So you're going to want to make sure that you make every unit count as they come across. Where are they going to arrive at? What are you going to use them for? And you don't want to lose them willy-nilly when you have to invest 4 or 5 turns just to get them into combat from being produced over here. But there are a lot of units already in the theater. The British, these forces around Singapore aren't going to hold long, but as a British player, as the Allied player, do you, just have your naval vessels run for it? Do you try to have them help hold a little bit? Probably not going to be too productive no matter what. Let's just take a little tour of the map here. So we got Hawaii. We have the Oklahoma survived the Pearl Harbor. So a little bit different result than historical. We got a couple other ships out here. We do have, the Saratoga we've brought forward. If we look up here, so in the US, we can see to kind of the middle of the country, but most of that's not going to be playing a part in the game unless something goes crazy and the Japanese somehow land over here, which I'm sure it could be done. But for the most part, we're going to be deploying units here and sending them off. If we go look up here in Alaska, we can see Dutch harbors there. We've got Kiska and Attu Islands there, so they're in the game if you want to go land on them as the Japanese player. And then as we come over here, we do have a few Soviet units, so we have control as the Allied player. We do have control of these Soviet units, but probably not going to be able to do much with them for now. Though, of course, that could change as the campaign goes on. Maybe towards the end, we pull them in somehow. And then if we're looking at Japan itself, so it does have quite a few hexes. So, the potential is there for landing a land force and fighting it out on Japan. We see these little special hexes here. So if we wanted to carry out the Doolittle, the bombing of Tokyo, we just need to get a carrier and park it on one of those hexes, and it'll just kind of automatically happen. So usually strategic command games have a lot of little things like that, little special hexes and things to reenact historical events. These blue lines are supply lines, so if we can park ships on these, we can raid them and try to cut off the Japanese from getting the MPPs, which is the production points you need to build more units and reinforce. And then if we come over here and look at China, this situation is very complex. Lots of ground combat to happen here. We've got all these mountain hexes. We have the national China here, and then there is a little Chinese communist China enclave here. I'm curious to see what kind of events going to fire to affect the relationship there. But right now, we have control of both. So that would be interesting to see how that plays out. So as the Allied player, if you choose to control all the nations, you're fighting this war in China along with the naval war out here. So giving you pretty good variety of gameplay. And as we look here, we see a lot of different things being represented. The US presence, the different parts of China. And then we come over here. We got India, we got Burma. So supply is, of course, a huge factor in these games. If you haven't played them before, supply is maybe the most important thing to understand. You can hit the S key to show what the supply level is in each hex. So like here in Calcutta, it's 12, which is great, amazing. But out here in Burma, from these towns, it drops off real fast 2 and 3 and 1 or 0. And units basically cease to be functional when they get that low on supplies, and enemy units can just roll right over them. The way you can get around those really low levels is having headquarters units, and because they can boost the supply of the local area, and so you pretty much have to have those for fighting in those areas, but you have a limited number of HQs, so where you position them can be very important. We see some of these like red hexes that we can disrupt shipping there, or the Japanese can if they park ships on those hexes. So you'll see a lot of special hexes like that down here around Singapore. Yeah, doesn't look good. Australia. So again, Australia is this huge land area, but probably not going to be much fighting over the desert or anything. If we look just out of curiosity, yeah, there's no supplies out there. Your units will just die if you send them out there. But there are a lot of locations here that as a Japanese player, you could potentially disrupt shipping here. You could land forces and attack. And then if we look here, just kind of looking for some historical locations. So Guadalcanal, there's several hexes for Guadalcanal. You got Henderson Field, and you got a lot of you'll see a lot of familiar names here. One thing that I love about the Strategic Command games is that they don't railroad you into following history, and a lot of times they'll give you sort of historical decisions that were plausible or like real decisions, but let you choose, well, you know, what if I didn't do that, or what if I did this other thing that they considered at the time that would at least be plausible. So it's not kind of the crazy stuff like in Hearts of Iron. It's usually like, what if they had said yes instead of no to some real historical proposition. And those can cause the campaign to play out a little bit differently without it getting crazy. But like I was saying, usually the campaign is going to play out somewhat like history if you just go along with the normal decisions and do the historical thing. But a lot of times it's because it makes sense. Like doing the historical thing made sense. That's why they did it in the first place. And a lot of times it'll make sense to do it here, though you can get creative and do other things too. So we see here Saipan, Iwo Jima, Okinawa. Those are all here, and we can see that, yeah, why did they attack those places? Because they were stepping stones to get to Japan, and prepare to launch a full-scale invasion there, which, you know, luckily did not ever happen. I'll be interested to see, yeah, is the nuclear weapon option, the atomic bomb, how does that play into it towards the end of the game? That'll be interesting. Do you choose to use it or not? Or maybe there'll be like a decision, you know, how many do you want to invest in it or spend those resources on something else? Might be interesting to see. Like I said, I haven't played through the campaign yet. I'm just kind of getting a feel for it. So yeah, that's a look at the map. Now, if you've never played one of these games before, I'm going to do like just kind of a little overview of the UI and how the game functions, the mechanics. But I might do like a tutorial video later. Like I said, the manual actually has a strategy guide in it that'll give you some good tips, general advice on things to do. But I could do a like tutorial video just in case you haven't played one of these games before to learn the basics of how to control everything. But just real quick, we'll look at, you can look at this war map screen, which I usually don't spend too much time here, but it kind of gives you the big picture. You can see where all the convoy routes are, which is very helpful because you'll want to be cutting those off if you can to starve your enemy of MPP, which is basically the production points that are used to buy new units, to research, to do everything. That's kind of your one currency in the game, and to reinforce units. So if you can starve the enemy of just a few points, you can save yourself a lot of effort over time by preventing them from reinforcing, preventing them from buying new units, and that kind of thing. If we come here to the purchase screen, we can see all the different units that we can buy right now. But right now we don't have, this first turn we have like no points, so we can't really buy much of anything. But the game limits how many you can build of unit types. So like there's a build limit. You can turn that off. You can also go with like a soft limit where you can go over that, but with a penalty. But I usually just play with the historical build limits since that kind of gives the conflict a realistic flavor to it. looking at the USA here, we kind of have everything you'd expect. I notice like the Marines fall under the Special Forces unit. And we can't build any armies. We can build corps, not armies. Armies might pop up later to be able to build them, because I see like the British do have army units, so they're a little bit bigger and stronger. And as you can see, you actually manage every different faction's production and also research when we get to that. But each nation's limited in different ways. So like there's a Free France, but they can build one garrison unit, which is basically just a unit to park somewhere to cover a city or something. But for the United States, of course, you have tons of stuff you can build. You can build heavy tanks, but not till 1943. But more to the useful point, there's fighters. There's 4 different kinds of bombers. There's super battleships, regular battleships, 3 different kinds of cruisers, destroyers, escort carriers, regular carriers, subs. So a ton of aircraft and naval units to build, which of course will be important in this campaign. And then also a pretty good variety of ground units with a few special things like rocket artillery, paratroopers. You can have a couple units of them. And then the headquarters units, like I mentioned, are very important, but limited, and they're expensive. Like a headquarters unit costs 390 points there, which is more than a super battleship. So you're limited on those, and you definitely don't want to lose those in battle ever, because they are pretty much not irreplaceable, but a bad hit if you lose one of those. So thanks to that. The Russians actually have a pretty big variety of stuff they can build too, so I wonder how much you can build up that force. And then for like the Chinese, you got some stuff to build. The Communist China is separate for their building and constructing units, and then Australia, New Zealand, New Guinea have a little smattering of units you can build for them too. And then we can also hit this production screen and see when you order things, it takes time for them to arrive, so many turns. Or how many months it will take. You can see here. So like a super battleship takes 15 months. So from the time you spend the points to buy that, it's gonna be a long time before it actually appears. And like we already saw, it's gonna take a long time for it to come from the West Coast all the way out here also. So that's a big investment that you're gonna be waiting a long time to see pay off. But if you're thinking grand strategy, if you're expecting to use those guys, you need to plan out more than a year ahead of time of when you want those to kind of arrive to be part of your strategy. But if we look here at the production screen, we can actually see at the start of the game, there's a ton of units on the way, naval units for like the United States. But some of these aren't going to arrive until 42, 43, 44. So these are basically free units that you're going to get, but it's going to be a while before some of them show up. And then each faction has at least so like for the British, also naval units on the way, and then kind of a smattering for the other factions of a couple units. You also typically get some units for free from special events and things, but for the most part, you're going to be deciding what you want to build over time. There's diplomacy screen, which for this campaign, not a whole lot of diplomacy going on. But you can actually do it as these different nations individually. Invest some of your points in diplomacy to get to maybe bring over some little minor factions. Some of the other games, strategic command games, diplomacy is important. You can bring over a whole nation or something, like in the World War II scenario. But in this specific focused one, there's not a whole lot of diplomacy going on. I think interesting, there's Afghanistan there. I'd almost want to bring them on side just to see what do you get from getting Afghanistan to join the war. Maybe like just 1 or 2 little bitty units would be kind of a novelty just to try to do that. And then research is going to be another important thing. So each of your nations is also individual on terms of research, what they can research, what their level is of different things. So you have to come here and manage that. Like for the United States, they're actually maxed out on research already. So a lot of these things are already in swing, but over time, as they get completed, you'll come back here and choose what you want to focus on. So a lot of these are going to make your units a little bit stronger, let you build a little bit more of certain things sometimes, or like logistics is going to let you build more HQs, more transports, and make your HQs better at supplies. So some of these can do a lot of things. It's important to research as much as possible, especially if you want to focus your strategy in certain ways, like advanced subs, better naval weapons, or better ground attack, better infantry, that sort of thing. And then really that's most of the UI here. And then moving units around is pretty easy. We'll zoom in. So we got the garrison here at Corregidor. Down here we can see a lot of stats for them. But basically the stars, if they get experience points, they can get stronger here if they get more stars. But if they take losses, that can go away over time. Supply level is, like I said, extremely important. You want that up around 10 if you can get it there. 5 is not great. But then we can see readiness, morale, a lot of things go into affecting those. But entrenchment, they're in a little fortified hex there, so their entrenchment can go up to 8, which is really high, and that goes up automatically if they just hang out there. But the Japanese are probably going to come along pretty quick and crush them. And then moving units around, doing combat is easy. You just click on one of these hexes to move them. You can also do strategic movement if there's railroads, which of course here not going to be worth spending the points to do that. You can spin the naval unit, or send them as naval transports or amphibious transports if you want to attack. And then you can force march to get them to go further, but not going to be using that too much on these little island areas. Combat is also pretty straightforward, at least understanding it. There's a lot of factors that go into it, but say we select this unit and we see there the 2 and the 0 means if we attack, we're going to take probably 2 hits, and the Japanese are going to take no hits. And they're 3 and 0, not looking good. And then kind of same thing here. Yeah, 2 and 0. So if we attack there, they're just going to get destroyed. There's really not much hope for those guys, but we can maybe you can try to retreat them out of there. You select an air unit, kind of the same thing. You just select where you want them to go. You can also have them do reconnaissance missions to fly out and see what's out there. But really the controls are pretty simple. And as you can see, there's a lot going on here, but there's not that many. The unit counter density it's just right for me. You got enough here to maneuver, to kind of think about what you want to do. You can build a lot of units, but it's all pretty straightforward. So that's what I really like about this series. And looking at this, I mean, the mind just races at all the opportunities, all the potential for different strategies and things of what you want to try to do as either side. There's just so many options that it will be fun to play this out and just see how it goes. So this is just my first look video. Like I said, I'll probably circle back around. The game officially comes out here in a couple days, but I was lucky enough to get this preview build of it, so I wanted to just give people a look at it if you're thinking about buying. But for me, as someone who's played a lot of Strategic Command games before, I'm excited to play this one. It definitely looks fun. I love the map and all the options, and I think playing as the Allies and then playing as the Japanese will be a very different experience as far as the momentum of the war and how it started off with, you know, the Axis aggression, and then the Allies eventually working their way through all the islands to push them back. But as a Japanese player, if you're doing that, you know, it'd be a lot of questions of, do you go with the historical route? Do you go with something totally different? And seeing, you know, can you make it work for them? But anyway, yep, that will conclude the video. I hope you enjoyed getting this look at Strategic Command War in the Pacific. Subscribe to the channel to see more videos on this game and other strategy and tactics games. And thank you for watching. Bye.